Hi Adam, really lovely to see you today. Welcome to the Listen.Better podcast, and I'm really interested to hear your story. I know we've chatted a little bit before this interview, but can you start off just by explaining your role and what you get up to?
I am the Director of External Relations for a company called Lifeways. Lifeways provides care and support across the UK to about 5,000 people, the vast majority of whom have a learning disability. We also do some support to people with mental health problems, but we're the largest provider of support in the community to people with a learning disability. And my job is to manage our external relations across most of our, across the whole organisation. And that's with the people who fund us, which is local authorities and CCGs. It's with central government, and it's also with the families and carers of the people we support. I also manage press relations as well. So quite a range of stuff.
And CCGs?
Care commissioning groups, which is the commissioning arm of the NHS. So most of the work we do is commissioned by local authorities. About 10% is commissioned by the NHS, and that's the pathway that they use to commission our services.
Okay, and can you paint a picture about the sort of people you care for? You mentioned 5,000, so just paint me a picture of...
Well, perhaps one way of painting that picture is that we have 11,000 people who care for 5,000 people. So that kind of shows that the people we support do have quite, generally speaking, quite high levels of need. And as I say, the vast majority are people with a learning disability. And one of the things that perhaps people don't necessarily understand or don't think of first when you think about somebody with a learning disability is a learning disability is part of who you are. It's part of your being. It's not something that you recover from or can be cured or anything like that. I guess the philosophy, the principle that underpins what we do is that people with a learning disability are our fellow citizens, and they have rights just like everybody else. And what we do is support people, sometimes with quite complex needs, to live in their own flat or in a small group home, essentially in the community. And the contrast with 50 years ago, which is when the vast majority of people with a learning disability lived in a hospital and had very few rights, and were largely ignored and overlooked. That's changed a huge amount, and my organisation's a part of that. So we are talking about people who may not, for example, may not be able to speak very well, or may struggle with some physical aspects of, they may have health issues, and an intellectual disability. Their cognitive function may not be everything that that somebody without a learning disability would have. And people with Down syndrome, perhaps a lot of people are familiar with Down syndrome, but there's a wide variety of learning disabilities, and we support people right across that spectrum.
So from a comms point of view, there's complex and sensitive issues to deal with. And so if we cast our minds back to March 2020, the beginning of pandemic in the UK at least, what on earth went through your mind in terms of what you're going to have to do and deal with and
Well, I think it would only be candid to say we didn't have a plan. We had a whole range of contingency plans, but we did not have a contingency plan for a pandemic. And our primary concern at the beginning was that it rapidly became apparent that after age, having disabilities and having health issues was a major risk factor with COVID, as indeed it often is with other illnesses. So our primary issue was to make sure people were safe, and my role within that, in terms of communication, probably I think it'd be fair to say had sort of three elements. The first one was communicating with families and carers, and to make sure that the families and carers, the people we support, knew that we were going to be continuing to deliver the services that we do, that we would find ways to operate as safely and as effectively as we could. And to give reassurance to that group. The second one was with our local authority commissioners, and making sure that they understood the particular risks that we'd identified, and were able to support us with those risks. So people will probably remember conversations around PPE, protection equipment. At the early stages, there was a real problem with that. It didn't last very long, and we managed to overcome it, but it was quite scary. We didn't have the equipment in place to do the things we wanted to do safely. And the third one was talking to government, and trying to make sure that the government understood the particular risks that the people we support were facing, and that they would support us in mitigating those risks. But it was quite a roller coaster. The other thing we did was we closed the vast bulk of our offices straight away to minimise travel. Now, obviously, 90% of the people who work for us are frontline staff. They had to go in. You can't support someone with a learning disability remotely. You have to be in the presence of that person and be with that person. And that was a big deal. We had to talk to our staff to make sure that they felt safe. They were pretty remarkable. We had the overwhelming majority of the people who work for us. They kept rocking up, and I guess there was probably a period of about 4 to 5 weeks when we were flying by the seat of our pants, and getting people through that on a day-by-day basis. But people kept turning up, and we managed to keep them safe. And overall, while it is the case that the vulnerabilities of people with a learning disability to COVID have meant that some of the people we support have died, overall, the way in which we support people in small groups and in their own homes has had a very positive effect on keeping people safe.
It sounds like you've learned a tremendous amount. Whilst you might not have had a plan, you certainly went into action very fast. What have you learned? Can you identify 2 or 3 things perhaps that you will take forward as a result in terms of how you've changed, how you communicate, how you motivate and manage your team?
Well, funny enough, without knowing that a worldwide pandemic was on the way, at the end of 2019, at the very beginning of 2020, we'd started using a piece of software called Microsoft Workplace. Sorry, not Microsoft, it's called Workplace, which is, other schemes are available, but this is essentially the business version of Facebook. And it's proved to be a massive boon, and our ability to talk to everybody in our organisation. People just sign up to it, just like they do with Facebook. And we didn't have a way of talking to our 11,000 people before we had that. And I would recommend using those types of media, especially if you're a very dispersed organisation. We have 11,000 people working in about 1,200 locations. You cannot send everybody an email. You cannot send everybody a memo. But what you can do is put up really useful information. So particularly around when the issues around testing and how people had to be tested, that was a really great medium for that. And then later on, once the vaccination program got going, we were able to communicate with large numbers of our staff very quickly about that. And it's also a feedback. We were getting much quicker feedback. What's happening with X? What's happening with Y? And there was a great example early on in the vaccination program where somebody pitched a question, and within about 5 minutes, and this is on to the general kind of page, within about 5 minutes they'd had a specific reply from the subject matter expert in the business about exactly what they should do, and they'd had another reply from the chief executive setting out saying, I understand why you're worried about that, we've been talking about that, and this is what we're doing about it. And that was very effective. Now, I haven't got shares in Workplace, but just the idea of the use of technology in order to communicate with people. And the other thing that's fascinating about that is it seems to have generated a much more informal way of speaking and communicating with people. People are just sort of quite put little chirpy things on it and quite interested, and people will respond to it and it seems to have broken down some of those hierarchical barriers that definitely exist. I think it risks sounding like a cliche, but actually being honest with people and being candid with people about what we can do and what we can't do. Almost always people respond positively to that. And there are things that people have asked us to do that we can't do. And we've been blunt isn't quite the right word, but we've been specific in saying that's not how we do things. We can't make that change that you need us to make. Hopefully more often than not we can respond positively. But I think that candor is really important. So yeah, that's been really helpful. The other bit is obviously has been there are large numbers of people who used to go to offices and are now sitting at home like I am. It's been interesting because I think we seem to be working very effectively. It's not ideal for everybody, we know that, but the feedback we've had has been much more positive than negative. And people's ability to do all the things they want to do, people with young children, or people with caring responsibilities, whatever it might be, our capacity to support them with those responsibilities has radically increased. There was an example just the other day, talking to one of our area managers who I've known for a long time, as an excellent member of staff, and we were conversing on Teams, and then at the end of the day I called her back and she wasn't there. And I just left her a message, and the next morning I got this slightly frantic call from her saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I wasn't at my desk at 4:30. I said, "It's fine, it's not a problem." And she said, "I was doing the school run." I said, "Well, that's great. I'm really glad you're doing the school run." And I said, "Before we were doing this, were you able to do the school run?" She said, "No, because I had to get 10 miles into the office, and I didn't leave the office till 5, because that was the expectation." So my personal view is that the evidence at the moment is really strongly in favour that the merits of being able to communicate using technology like we're doing on this podcast is really does far outweigh the disadvantages. And we did an entire project with an outside organisation, which finished started in November and finished a couple of weeks ago, and nobody met anybody through that entire period, and yet it felt like quite creative. There was lots of stuff happening, people buzzing ideas around. I would say I don't know if we'd have done any better a job if we'd all had to get on trains and scoot up to London twice a week to do that.
So what I've heard is you've really, whilst you already had Workplace in its embryonic form before the pandemic actually accelerated the use.
Yeah.
And that flexible working, it's been proven where perhaps there might have been some reticence around it. It's been adopted more widely. Yes,
particularly at senior management level. Yeah.
And it hasn't decreased the collaborative and the creative opportunities to work with outside suppliers.
It doesn't seem to have done. And a lot of the fears we probably had around that just don't seem to be realised at the moment. It's early days, it's only a year in, and people do need, people talk about those, water cooler moments and things like that. And obviously those don't happen in the same way. I think they might be beginning to happen in different ways. I think people are kind of getting into the habit of going, "Oh, that's an interesting little thing," sticking it on Workplace, putting a Teams call is fascinating, isn't it? Because you've got the chat going on in the side, and people saying, "Oh, have you seen that?" And that's interesting. And it's actually quite a creative environment to be in, And then someone's going to share their screen now, and that pops up, and everybody's focused on that particular thing. And from personal level, I find it easier to concentrate on a call than I do in a room. Perhaps because I haven't burnt off a lot of energy going 50 miles to get to that meeting. I don't know. It's an interesting question. But if you look at the performance of my organisation over the last year, if we would not have anticipated how in many aspects of what we're doing, it's gone as well as it has. I think if you'd said to us in March, you're going to hit these targets in a year, I think we would have thought, that's too much to ask for. So yeah, it's really it's okay, it's good. Obviously we're 1 year in. Whether this is going to have longer term effects, but we're not going back. We're not going to go back. Never waste a good crisis. It's you've got to adapt. You've got to change, because I think people who don't are going to struggle. We're just about to hire a couple of people into one of our back office functions, and previously those people would have needed to live within commuting distance of SE1 of the borough, Southwark in London. Now we can recruit pretty much anybody from anywhere in the UK. We have to stay in the UK because of just in terms of employment law. We've probably increased by a factor of 9 or 10 the potential market for those the people we're looking for, and people with a disability perhaps who thought, well, I can't do that job because I'm not going to schlep into London every day. They could do that job. Women with children, people with caring responsibilities. I think we are potentially really broadening. There's a job market that I think will look really quite different very, very quickly. And I think any organisation that says you've got to be in the office 5 days a week, who's going to want to work for them?
I've been hearing a lot similar sentiments from other leaders and heads of comms particularly, and HR directors. I suppose the challenge might come with perhaps more junior members of staff who haven't had any ability to build their networks or be part of an office environment to learn those professional skills. I'm just wondering, have you met that yet, or was that something you're anticipating? And
I think that's a very good example of something that will potentially develop over time. And yes, you're absolutely right that clearly, I'm coming at it from the experience of trolling into an office for 35 years. So it's a really good point, and not one that we've had to address yet, but I suspect we probably will need to at some point in the future. And clearly, as I say, the vast majority of our staff are still going to work. They are going to knocking on the doors of the people they support every day and supporting them through that day, and then going home at night. That hasn't changed at all, and there's no prospect of that changing. What we do is we support people on a one-to-one basis to live their lives in the community, and that's not something that can be done remotely or by technology. So that will remain the same. The ongoing how we communicate with people, it's definitely changed in the sense that an awful lot more of it is being done remotely, and I was quite anxious about that, but as I said, I think overall, I think we're learning quite fast how to do that. And going back to the workplace piece, the ability to pick up stuff and respond quickly and to a huge cohort has been really, really helpful. It was just the other day, I'd missed the post. Somebody had made a post about a particular activity that I'm involved in, and I was able to go back to the person who alerted me and say, right, the answer to that is this. Get it out there, and we got it out there to 500-600 people who are affected. Never been able to do that before. So that is something that we would be really struggling without that. So we made the right decision to get into using social media as our prime form of communication. I'd like to claim credit that we were incredibly foresighted in doing so, but we weren't. It was a bit of luck, but I would recommend it.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks so much. And just to wrap up, if you were to be candid with how perhaps you feel you might have changed over the course of last year in terms of how you lead and manage and communicate.
I think I found it quite a challenge. I think my particular style I think is about being quite one-to-one with people and persuasive, if you like, in a one-to-one setting, and my the people I directly manage, I haven't seen any of them for a year. I think it has made me. I've picked up the phone. Well, actually, I hardly ever pick up the phone anymore. I've get on Teams with people, and I've made myself that become just a habit. If I want to know something from any of the people who work for me, I will just Teams them, and I don't know. Hopefully, they don't find it too annoying. But actually, it's a really good way just to see somebody's face and to do that, and it does have that lightness of touch rather than sending somebody an email or a memo. Memo, an email. So I've had to adapt to that, and I do miss the being in the kind of, in the hubbub, if you like. I miss that sense of being in the middle of something. But as I say, I think overall, I think having to learn to operate in the way that we have has been, I think it's been a good thing for our organisation. And it is interesting how again, if you had said to us a year ago, we will have the entire back office function of the organisation operating remotely, we wouldn't have known what you were talking about. And now that's the reality, and it's going to remain the reality. So kind of exciting in a way that's happened. And it makes me quite proud to have been part of something that's we showed that we were flexible, we showed that we were adaptable, we showed that we weren't just clinging to old ways and willing to adopt new ways. So that's been quite I don't think I've ever been, well, none of us have we? But to gone through this and to been part of an organisation that has managed to stick to its core mission and thrive. It's something to be proud of.
Thanks very much, Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and very best of luck with the coming months. And
thank you.
Big plug for Workspace. If you haven't got it
already, yes,
get it.
No shares. Don't have any. I have no other forms of communication are available. Absolutely. It's been lovely talking to you. Thanks, Annabel.
Bye bye.